Thanks. Hi, everyone. First, thanks to UNH for the opportunity to have Gabe work on a very challenging question for Middlebury, and that is how do we properly account for the emissions from our biomass system? It's been my pleasure to know Gabe's most of the time he's been at Middlebury, and he's been a real force of change at the college. And like a lot of his student colleagues, Gabe's willing to put in the hard work and do the collaborative work that's necessary to take ideals and put them into action, and has had a really great influence on a lot of things at Middlebury, especially our Energy 2028 initiative, which is a very bold effort that we're taking to address the climate crisis. So, Gabe leaves us in January, and we're sad about that, and we're happy about that. Sad that we're going to leave. We're going to lose a student like Gabe, but happy that he's going to be out in the world having an even greater influence, I'm sure, on the future of a sustainable future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gabe, and we'll go on.
Great. Thank you, Jack, so much. It's been a pleasure working with you this summer, and of course over the last 2.5 years as well. So so my project essentially is to add a biomass accounting tool to our annual greenhouse gas inventory as a college. And if you're not familiar with biomass as an energy source, it's essentially burning wood chips to produce steam, then heats our campus, and also co-generates electricity. And in our system, all of that wood is coming from within a 75-mile radius. A little less than a quarter comes from leftover wood at a local sawmill, and the rest is selectively harvested from our local forests, and so no clear cutting or anything like that. And Middlebury first started tracking our greenhouse gas emissions in 2006 when we pledged to be carbon neutral by 2016, a goal which we have since met. And a large part of why we were able to reach that goal was the creation of our biomass plant that went online in 2008. You can go to the next slide. And a lot of that decrease from biomass you can actually see on this graph. If you look at the blue and gray lines in the middle, that's our current emissions, and you see between 2008 and 2010 a pretty significant drop of around 40% that stems directly from this transition to biomass and away from burning number 6 fuel. So you might be wondering, biomass still emits carbon, right? And the answer is yes, but current federal and international accounting standards suggest that because trees can regrow in a human timescale, unlike fossil fuels, the biomass is carbon neutral, and as such, we've been marking it as 0 in our inventory. But we know that the notion of biomass as carbon neutral is pretty contentious, both politically and scientifically. And ultimately, it all comes down to where you draw your boundaries around your system. And that can boil down to a judgment call. And so while I'm focusing specifically on Middlebury, this is an issue that institutions across the country and across the globe have been grappling with for decades now. So going back to this graph, you can kind of see the wide range of potential values for how you could attract our greenhouse gas inventory with biomass. And so if you look at, again, the blue line is how we currently report, and there's a gray line that you can maybe just barely see above it. That's if you add the upstream emissions from biomass. But if you also look at the emissions coming from our smokestack from biomass, that's the orange line up top. You'll notice it's more than twice as high as our current emissions. But that does not take into account the fact that the wood that we're harvesting from these lands, those trees in the forest are also regrowing and sequestering carbon. And if you take into account all of that sequestration, you actually end up on that green line going down at the bottom. That's sort of our lower value. You'll see that's actually a negative value for our total greenhouse gas inventory, even without taking into account some of our offsets. But that's also problematic because then you're taking credit for carbon that's being sequestered on other folks' lands. And essentially, this wide range is why it's so difficult to narrow in on carbon accounting. And it really boils down to this question of how much of the regrowth in forests is directly related to the wood products industry. And of course, with really intentional harvesting, you can actually foster more growth in the forest. And there's some lands that are privately held that the landowners can only afford to keep forested because of the ability to harvest and sell some of that wood. So Even with current harvesting, a net of 3 million tons are being sequestered in the state of Vermont annually by trees. And we would need to assume that about a little more than half of that is related to the wood products industry for the notion of carbon neutral to be true for biomass. Go to the last slide. So just sort of some overall takeaways. Obviously, there's a ton of growth, with this project. If you wanted to really narrow in on as accurate of a number as possible, and you need a really in-depth project looking at all the different forests in the land and checking how much growth there is on a year-to-year basis, and interviewing all the local landowners and getting an idea of how much harvesting is really essential to keeping that land forested. So I also want to say I've grown a bunch as a professional. It's been great to have this work experience as an academic. I'm a philosophy student predominantly, but it's been great to really focus in on methodology and sort of the science and data side of this. And lastly, as a consumer, roughly a quarter of our heat in the state of Vermont comes from biomass, and a little less than that for electricity. And so, when you're flipping on the light switch and turning on the heat pump, it's good to know where that's coming from. So lastly, I just want to thank Jack. I also want to thank Mike Mosier, Adam Sherman, and Mark Lappin, and my wonderful team at Middlebury, and the whole UNH team for all their support, and especially Jen, who I know this was sort of her brainchild. So I really appreciate having the chance to be part of this, and look forward to answering some questions later. Thanks.